As the cybersecurity director at Dynetics today, it's my pleasure to introduce this morning's keynote speaker to get us started. We are honored to have Ms. Bobbie Stempfley, who is the director of the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute's CERT division. She also previously served as director of cybersecurity implementation at MITRE and is acting assistant deputy secretary for the Department of Homeland Defense Office of Cybersecurity and Communications. Before that, she served our Defense Department as the CIO of DISA, which has got to be one of the most difficult CIO jobs in the world. And she was also the chief of the DoD's Computer Emergency Response Team, which she actually founded. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, Mrs. Bobbie Stempfley.
Good morning, everybody. Listening to your bio is always a little dangerous, right? Because it either makes you sound better or worse than you are. I think that one makes me sound like I can't keep a job, and a whole bunch of other issues. Really, it is absolutely my privilege to be here this morning and to talk to you about cyber. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how to approach this discussion because this is Rocket City, right? There are lots of really smart people here. And I have the privilege of running a research lab in cyber, security and operations, at the #1 computer science college in the nation. It's a pretty impressive place to be. I work with a ton of wicked smart people. And I believe strongly that we're not going to solve this problem with technology. Technology is a part of the problem. So I'm sitting here going, how am I going to talk about the past, present, and future of cyber from a position of a technologist at the #1 computer science research college in the nation to an audience who lives this every day? And I thought a lot about what this week is. So for those of you who weren't watching the news this morning and don't know, this is the 75th anniversary of the D-Day, the Battle of Normandy, or Battle of the Bulge. My kids all know that when I speak, I tell stories about my kids. So as we go through this conversation, you're going to hear a few secrets they would rather you not hear. So if any of you bump into them, and at least one of them's in the industry, don't tell there. But my son's actually in France. He landed this morning. He's a part of a group that's representing the United States as we commemorate this horrific moment in our history and this incredibly proud opportunity. And so that led me to believe that what we needed to talk about today was about where past is prologue and where it's not. And so being given the opportunity to open this discussion, I thought that would be a really great way to do it. In addition to my professional experience, I have the great honor of being the descendant of a hero. I think we all have that honor in some way. My grandmother was a cryptographer. My grandmother was an auxiliary for the US Navy during World War II. She had the privilege of working around a small table with pencils on something called Purple. Purple was the Japanese code, cryptographic code that we couldn't break. They used a Bombus machine in the back of the room. They did their work with pencil. Her team of 6 women worked in the basement of what was a Catholic girls' school until Pearl Harbor, and the U.S. Navy capitalized it. You now know it as the DHS headquarters building on Nebraska Avenue. It has a rich history of being a cryptographic support element during World War II, where they housed these women and they worked around the clock. The wonderful thing about this is they successfully broke that code. It's part of the reason we won the war. They don't get enough credit. That's problem number one. And in not getting enough credit, they also were auxiliary. Until it wasn't until 20 years ago that they could be buried in Arlington as a veteran. of their own right. They were an auxiliary. Congress passed a law that also allowed them to win an accommodation medal. These are phenomenal changes in life. I feel this connection to my grandmother every day. She was a force in my life. And I didn't realize until many years later, because she never talked about it, that she was my path to public service. She, my parents, carrying forward. And so what is this past? What does it teach us about our future? Some 31 years ago, when the intergalactic network, right, we all know that the internet is the intergalactic network, and I'm so thrilled that NASA is continuing to try to build the intergalactic network. But when the intergalactic network was established, a bad thing happened. Probably could have predicted it, not sure we really knew that what bad could happen, but a bad thing happened. The Morris worm happened. And it dawned on the folks at DARPA that we needed to be ready to deal with it. And that their vision of this internet, this global good that industry created, developed, and moved forward, they knew that it was going to be transitioned into an industry format, needed an arbiter, needed somebody to figure out how to handle when bad things happened. Now, I have the privilege of leading the group that was stood up 31 years ago in order to figure out how to deal with the next bad thing, how to be ready to be out ahead. It's much harder today. That is our past. It's much harder today because the world evolves in a much more rapid way than it ever did before. But the lesson, one of many lessons from this activity, is that this laid the foundation for how we think about roles and responsibilities in cyber. Right? The government built the thing. The government stepped in and helped us figure out how to do it. It transitioned to industry. We still don't have a resolution completely of what the roles of the US government are, what the roles of states are, what the roles of industry are, and what the obligation of the users are. That is the debate at a policy level we've been having for the better part of the last 10 years. Once we figured out that bad things could happen, it dawned on us that bad things existed in the network, right? Software was written by people. At the time, it is no longer really written by people in the same way. And so we needed to know when there was a flaw in it. At the time, we thought we could figure out what all those flaws were. So we're about 26 years in the Wayback Machine at this point. We thought we could enumerate them. We knew that there was about 100 flaws per 10,000 lines of code. A lot of energy was spent on figuring that out. Once I can enumerate them, that's a number I can conceptualize. We can start tracking down the 100. The number of computers that existed at that point in time seemed rational. We didn't envision a world with the kind of connectivity and speed we're talking about today. But we know that things are going to go wrong. We know that not everything is perfect. And we know in doing that, we need to find ways to identify as quickly as possible the things that aren't right and restore and patch, to rebuild, to regain. We also know today that crowdsourcing this problem has been a very effective thing to happen. Right? There's an entire community of researchers who are finding flaws, who are doing the right thing about identifying them, bringing them to the attention of industry partners. I would say if you look across the breadth of industry, the maturity of handling that varies widely. It is a true statement. John Deere, right? We all know John Deere, wonderful tractor. They're a tractor company, right? They're a big metal kind of company. John Deere will tell you they're a software company that deploys onto a hardware platform. They're figuring out what it means to have a vulnerability management and disclosure program. They started building tractors. They're now a software company. And so as other companies, as other industries come to the appreciation of how dependent they are on software, they need to really understand how to handle this thing. Are we ever going to live in a world without the idea of a vulnerability? I don't think so. Are we going to be more mature in how we manage them? Absolutely. And that's the challenge for us for the future. Not only do bad things happen, people write code that does bad things. We need to analyze it, find it. Right, we're evolving, so we're now about 20 years in the Wayback Machine, where we said, we need to understand how all these things connect together. We know we have incredibly high-end adversaries. We know that the work factor for what they're doing is really low. Right, we make it easy. They build on tools they've built. We do the same. And so knowing what these code trees are within the malicious code is an important analytic element. We figured that out about 22, 24 years ago. And we started building code trees. The antivirus industry grew from this concept, right? Figure out what the bad thing is that can happen, build the signature, test for it, execute, run this chain. I would say that the thing we did not appreciate then either was speed and scale, right? We started with the belief that we could understand the entire world. There was a limited number of ways you could write malicious code. That limited number of ways could be identified and tracked. I think the present and the future have invalidated that assumption, and we've needed to think about this in a different way. And so as we evolved, we said, maybe we should write this stuff better to begin with, right? Let's think about security as an ility, as a property that needs to be in place. Let's define it at the beginning and engineer it in. I'm all on board. That is exactly the right thing to do. It is, I think, we've been proven to say, insufficient. As we focus on building this better, as we focus on understanding how to write the software or assemble the software that needs to be a part of your solution space, I think we always have to remember that today and in the future, the adversary attacks a limited number of things. Right? The adversary attacks flaws in our architectures. We make design trades every day. Flaws in our implementation, think about that as a vulnerability. And most importantly, flaws in our test cases. We don't test for a whole range of things. And I think most significantly what you're seeing today is they target flaws in our imagination. Oh, I didn't realize that 18-year-old who doesn't have a lot to do is going to use that piece of software that way. Interesting. We should think about that and be ready. I think we've all had that experience. But it's important for us to start from a foundation, a core that is as secure as possible. And so this idea of how do you build software securely? How do we get out into the field, into universities, coding practices and coding principles that are there? And so one of the wonderful things that the software engineering community has done is built secure coding standards. These are the ways that you use, the ways that you do these things. And you'll see that the US Congress has said that it's an important thing to do. They've included the requirement to demonstrate evidence of this in a range of NDAAs since 2016. The question is how, right? The implementation is left to the reader, and that work continues on. And then we've said we should know what's going on in the network, right? We should know it all. Again, I think we started this belief from the position of we could know it all. The number of computers, the number of nodes, these are all tangible things. But we should know it all. And so this concept of situational awareness came in the late 90s, probably 2002, around 2002. It dawned on a group of security professionals in the Department of Energy and at Ohio State University and in the Department of Defense that there was this breadth of data in the network that existed for billing purposes, and that perhaps we could use it for security purposes. And the dawn of situational awareness with NetFlow was born, and a range of tools were created. This continues to be the foundation of our US government network level insight today. It's an incredibly powerful set of data and resources when paired with more detailed collection and understanding. But the tension that we felt in 2002 is even more profound today, right? The tension of, do I need to know it all to react? Do I have enough insight in order to react effectively? I can know it all, so that if I don't, I gotta figure out how to know more. Storage got cheap at the same time, so collecting all of this data became easy. What are the analytics that let us pull something out of this that's useful, right? Now we're in an environment where the network itself tells us about itself at every step. Profoundly rich set of data that could be leveraged. We have to reconcile ourselves with the policy questions, the privacy questions, the utility questions, the storage questions. That tension is real today. That tension is getting more real as more and more of the internet becomes encrypted. And as a security professional, you're asked to pick. Do I believe that encryption is the better way to secure environments? Do I believe that I need situational awareness in order to more effectively defend? I know that CIOs the world over have said, okay, you've put everything behind SSL now. Do I have to break open SSL to find out what the adversary is doing in my network? So as security professionals, you're asked to pick. How do you make that choice? How do you understand what the right thing to do is? I wish there were a single answer that made that real. But what we find, leading us into the people part of this problem, what we find is people don't actually behave the way you think they will. So about 15 years ago, we heard the statement that all the insiders are the largest threats. And that I think at the time that was a gut feeling. Actually, I know at the time it was a gut feeling, having talked to the person who coined that phrase. That was a gut feeling. The data has, in fact, panned out in other pieces. This is, I think, the first point where we realize that it's not, as a community, it's not just the tech, it's the people. We should have known that from the beginning. Again, we started at a position of really being, I think, enamored with the technology. But then we came at the insider problem as though it were a law enforcement problem. We've all been trained. Did they buy a new car? Do they have more money, right? These are the things you look for. As studies have been done on insider cases over the last 15 years, we find that all those assumptions we had about how to figure out who the insider was are not actually how the insiders work. We took an investigative approach. This is what the investigator would look for. That led you to do more investigating, which proved that these people weren't insiders. And then when an indicator came up in another place, you investigated. We now have the data in order to really look at the fact that humans don't behave the way that people think they're going to behave. I don't behave the way you do. You don't behave the way he does. She doesn't behave the way I do. There are broad generalizations, absolutely, that we can put in place, and we do. But this aha moment that says, humans don't make decisions the way we expect them to make, is really useful, particularly when you get to where we were 10 years ago. And that was understanding enterprise risk. Where we said, and how many of you have both said this and heard it, we are going to make a data-driven risk decision, right? We say this all the time. We're going to make a data-driven risk decision, so we need a data framework that tells us what we need to collect, what we need to do. And such frameworks have been built and are incredibly powerful. The risk management model, the energy sector has a model for energy security and resilience. The healthcare sector is building a model for healthcare resilience. We think about enterprise risk. And having, at one stage in my life, been the risk official, I had the privilege or pain of sitting in front of every defense-wide application, every piece of software that was going on every computer on the Defense Department, every joint application, and having to make a decision that said, this is secure enough for the operational case it's being put forward to. It became incredibly clear to me that I know humans don't make data-oriented risk decisions. The other way I know this is people don't like to fly, right? Safest transportation mechanism, and people don't like to fly. We aren't making a data-based risk decision. This, as we move forward, is going to get much worse. I'd like to refer back to Winston Churchill, so in this theme of the past here. As we are in a world today where we are connected, and a hyperconnectivity world tomorrow, we're in a world of extreme complexity. Winston Churchill's comment, which I think is very apropos here, is that from extreme complexities come extreme simplicities. And we are seeking right now a world with extreme simplicities. We aren't there yet. Not only has the world gotten more complex because of hyperconnectivity, the world has gotten more complex because of supply chain. The world has gotten more complex because of liability concerns. The world has gotten more complex because we don't know the provenance of our software. The world has gotten more complex because we have more people who use things in unusual ways. The world has gotten more complex because we evolve so quickly that we don't understand the missions that these technologies are supporting. The world has gotten more complex because we are outsourcing to others. We have to seek those extreme simplicities. So that led us to what are 10-year generations. 20 years ago, better than 30 years ago now, the US Air Force said, this software thing, it's gonna be big. And they said, perhaps we need to understand how to build it, how to engineer it, how to apply discipline to it. And so the first epic of the production of an engineering discipline, the chart on your right here, is really, this is the process for how to build an engineering discipline. And it's the process we went through in the 80s for how to build an engineering discipline around software development. It's the process we went through in the 90s for how to build an engineering discipline around cyber engineering. So that's what we're all benefiting from and being victimized by right now, is that process of building an engineering discipline. It is the process we're going through right now in building an engineering discipline for this magical thing called artificial intelligence. We don't know how to engineer, to apply, to engage. But knowing that we needed these kinds of processes, we're applying this here. It took us about 18 years in software to go from nothing to an engineering discipline. It took us about 10 years in cyber to go from nothing to indications of an engineering discipline, so we're getting faster. It can't take us 10 years in artificial intelligence to build an engineering discipline associated with this. Now, thankfully, it's dependent on the two previous ones. If you don't appreciate it, I say this thing and folks go, oh yeah, AI is built with software. So all of the discipline that we built in software engineering will apply. AI changes the contested landscape in a profound way. So all the engineering skills that we built with cyber will apply. But it enables this hyper-connected world, this very simple use case where we now have opened the attack aperture, increased the speed, peppering data everywhere. This picture is a colleague of mine from Johns Hopkins built this picture. He and I co-present on a number of things, and it really in one place says, we are putting in the hands of everyone the capacity to do great good. We are putting in the hands of everyone the capacity to do great ill. This hyper-connected world opens great opportunity, and as a security professional, I have been in rooms where people say, we just didn't plan security from the beginning. We need to plan in security from the beginning. When are people going to realize that the risk of doing this is so great, it's going to be too great? There's some really interesting research done by Zurich, the Zurich Insurance Company, in partnership with Columbia University and the Atlantic Council, that has actually studied whether we will ever get to a point where being insecure is so great that it will devastate the economics of an industry. I'd like to say, absolutely, we're there, it'll happen. Their research actually has said that has not helped us from a security context. It has said that the cumulative effort of benefit has outweighed, to this point, the cost. So we've got to find a better argument, because that argument is not going to get us where we want to go. The data doesn't support that argument. So we've got to find a better argument. And I think our better argument ties back to this, software, it's going to be big. Because it is our strategic asset. And the world we are in today is so different from the world we were in 20 years ago. And the world we're going to be in 5 years from now is so different from the world we're in today. Software is a strategic asset. It is no longer written by people sitting and typing every line, right? It is composed, it's organized, it is aligned. We use software to write software. We use software to monitor software. We use software to find flaws in software. We use software to optimize software. It is man-made. And so we can do a lot to affect it. Speed changes everything. I think of all the energy we're putting towards getting an authority to operate quickly. So for those defense folks in the room, you're very familiar with what an authority to operate is, right? We've got a ton of energy being put towards, let's get the authority to operate quickly. Let's speed that up. Let's thin down both the process, the paperwork, let's make it more real. I'm all on board with that as a concept. But let's really appreciate that we're in a DevOps world. Even in legacy, the idea of sustainment is gone. We are changing that software every day. So we're not going to have a Netflix model on the space shuttle, I get it. We're not going to have a Netflix model where they run Chaos Monkey on the F-35. We're not going to have, there are applications where we have to have more clarity. But we are no longer in a world, even in our embedded systems, where we are releasing software every 4 years. We are no longer in a world, even in our most complex platforms, where we are releasing software every other year. We are in a world where we are releasing this stuff much faster. And in big parts of our use cases, you can release this stuff 6 times a day, even if you commit and release once a day. The attack surface has changed profoundly. What I would want as a security professional, as a risk assessor, knowing that this piece of software is only going to be in the field for a day, a week, a month, a year, is a different thing than I want if I think this piece of software is going to be in the field for a year, 5 years, and a decade. So it's time for an inversion. Right? It's literally time to invert the way we think about security and operations. The other thing you'll notice about this picture is that it's got data all over it. Data now has a privileged place in our world. As security professionals, we've long thought about protecting the border, right? The network boundary, the host boundary, the mission boundary. We say the boundary is dead. Yes, the network boundary likely is, but now we just call it the container. We've just moved those boundaries in. We've created more of them, and we still do a great deal of that kind of protection. We've just done it, we do them in different places. But data now has to be configuration managed. It has this privileged place in our world, and we are producing a ton of it. So this inversion I talk about is incredibly important because there is much more opaqueness in this environment, and we need more transparency and awareness. Because data has this privileged access. If you read the Verizon data breach report this year, you probably didn't notice, or maybe you did, 25% of the attacks were strategic, were focused on integrity-oriented approaches. Integrity attacks are the things we're worried about. Think about deep fakes as one example. It's sort of the most accessible example for individuals. But we are targeting the integrity of the data, what it's intended to tell you, what decisions you are intended to make. This idea of reasoning and cognition are assets. Humans don't make decisions the way we think they will. Their decision-making can be impacted. It's about that decision cycle. We've known this for a long time. We've then stepped into the tech. We're now stepping back out of the tech and saying, oh yeah, we can be influenced whether the decision is happening in my brain or I have outsourced that decision into a piece of software. The idea of reasoning and cognition are very much under attack today. And this greater demand for speed creates this tension of, I want it, I need it, it's gotta be there. How secure does it need to be in order to be real? How long is it going to be in operation? So this idea of speed is incredibly important. I put this picture up there for those of you from the Rocket City who are not familiar with this city. This is the city of Pittsburgh. It is where Carnegie Mellon University is built. It is the home of my grandmother. So we're going back to her for a few minutes. She raised her children there. She was a senior director at Merrill Company at the time. This is the city of rivers, tunnels, and bridges. And I find it to be incredibly poignant because as we've talked over the last 30 minutes or so, I continue to go back to this concept of data, right? We need it, we have it. We have to privilege it. Interestingly enough, we have so much of it, and it's actually of so little value right now. Right, as we are automating, as we are applying this next generation of technology to everything we do, as you are on the show floor here, as you've been at other places, as you're listening to your radio ads, you're hearing fueled by machine learning or fueled by AI. All of that is dependent on this data. I'm struck by a Kathy Mattea song that says, I am standing in a river, any one of them, the Allegheny, the Monongahela, or the Ohio, drowning of thirst, because I'm standing in data and more data is being produced, but it is not yet usable for us to take advantage of it in our protection, in our defense, and in our operations. And so that's a real challenge that I think the security professional community is facing today. This data is produced in operations. It's consumed and turned back around. It's produced as you build your software. It's produced as you move forward. The tight coupling that we see now between the operators, the mission, the business, and the developers has done away with this idea of sustainment, has enabled these kinds of continual evolution, and has really powered software as a strategic asset for not only this nation, for each business, for the national security community. And we have really are in the process of inverting all of the bureaucratic processes in order to support that. That is a huge cultural shift, right? Everybody who's always said, it's not secure enough, I need to understand it, here's what the adversaries are doing, how do I think about it? We finally included people in the problem. It took us 20 years, I think, to realize that people were an incredibly big part of the part of the system we needed to think about. And we need to invert, we're actually beginning this, it's really exciting actually, to think about the inversion of our adversary modeling. Right? We threat model from the perspective of the system. Here's the bounds on which the system. Remember that 18-year-old who was bored? He didn't know that the system had boundaries. And so we're now beginning to invert how we think about threat modeling to be more oriented towards here are the things, here are the ways that you might not perceive of the system being able to operate. Bringing in some wisdom from the safety community and the quality community as well. So pretty exciting stuff going forward. What I think you will see, what does this mean? What I think this means to all of us is that the next 5 years are going to be a little rocky. And they're going to be a little rocky because we are going to question, we have no choice but question every process that has existed. You're seeing in the Defense Department today the questioning of how they acquire software. You're seeing them recognize that this platform stuff and this software stuff can't be held apart. That the Defense Department is a software company with a bunch of platforms that executes a lethal and responsible mission, right? Their tech is this thing that can evolve very quickly. And that agility is in fact what we need, right? That agility in execution, operation, in transition, that's what we win with. And that's, I think, what the drivers behind so many of these inversions are. You're seeing a questioning of all of the security best practices that we've been given to follow over the years. Use case in point. 2 years ago, NIST changed its password guidance, right? They did it because this stuff that we'd been doing for a really long time, one uppercase, one lowercase, a drop of blood, turn 3 times, stand on 1 foot, right? Actually wasn't the most secure way possible. We had grown up in this mythology against dictionary attacks at a point in time, and we continued to evolve it. And we put some science behind passwords. A wonderful colleague of mine, Lori Craner, has put some science behind passwords and demonstrated to NIST that their guidance needed to change. And NIST was very welcoming of that change. The unfortunate reality is I still see the little password security weakness strength meters in when you're putting things into websites. So we've got some more work to do on getting the news out. But we're putting science and measurement behind the security features that we've all been told that need to happen. Because we've got to pick the right ones, and we've got to do them well, and we've got to do them quickly in this world where speed is our friend. We have to embrace the fact that uncertainty is the defender's friend. We know this, you might not realize it in application, but this idea of virtual memory assignment is an example of that, right? Adversaries get footholds, you want them not to have that foothold. Uncertainty is the defender's friend. Makes your world a little more complicated, but it is your friend. So those are just a bit of the technical inversions that are happening. But this is not a technology problem. Technology is just a part of it. This is a people problem. This is a strategy problem. And we're seeing real conversations on both of those as well, right? So people, we're, real focus on workforce-related activities, this idea of not just the cyber workforce, but growing the US skills in STEM throughout this nation at the undergraduate, graduate, doctoral, and postdoc levels. Incredibly important for us as a nation. We're starting to see that move as well. We're starting to see discussions about recognizing the real challenges in deterrence, what that needs to look like. So we're solving this problem across the entire dimension. We're starting to crack the code on what the role of government is, what the role of industry is, what my job is, and what my children's jobs are. Because they're all there and they're all different. And I think this, to echo the comments made at the beginning, this is a communication solution space. We need to work together. We need to talk with each other. And so conferences like this are really great because you get to see something from a different perspective. You get to talk to somebody that you don't meet with every day. And so my charge to you is, as you go through the next few days, think about the assumptions that we made in the past, the realities we're facing today, and how many of them are going to hold in the future, and start questioning. I'm going to leave you with one last story from World War II. And this is the story of a statistician. So a whole range, there was this conversation going on because the United States and the Allies were losing planes during World War II. They were getting shot down a great deal. And they brought a statistician in, they're looking at the planes and they're saying, tell me where to armor these planes so that they'll withstand the battles that are going on. They're having these discussions. They're like, okay, well, this plane had bullet holes here, so we're going to put armor here, and this one had bullet holes here, so our next design is going to armor in all of these places. The statistician walked in and he said, I suggest that what you do is you put armor in the places where there are no bullet holes, because those are the planes that didn't come back. And aren't those the ones we're trying to protect against? He inverted the problem. And so my challenge to you is to invert the problem, to ask the questions, because the solutions we need for the next 5 years are going to take all of us, and it is my privilege to be here with you as we go through the next several days. So thank you. I don't know how you want to do that. I have 4 minutes for questions. I've got this nice clock up here. They want me to run on time, so I'm taking a... I think, do you mind going to one of the microphones so that I can hear you? I can barely see you with the lights, so we're going to go with, it would be helpful to hear you.
Bobbie, what's your takeaway from the Winston Churchill analogy about extreme complexity leading to extreme simplicity?
So my takeaway from that analogy is that we need to stop and think more, right? Simplicity doesn't happen. Simplicity is created. And so complexity happens because we're just always going and we're adding on and we're characterizing and we're doing things. And we do a lot of that. There's a list of things that needs to be done. But we have to stop and look at that and take the time to see the elegant solution that's within the situation. One of the unfortunate realities of being in the security business is we feel the urgent press of the now more strongly than others. And we've got to guard against that. You're welcome.
Thank you for this interesting talk. My name is Ravi Rao from FDU. I have a quick question about the skills gap that you just mentioned. So I've seen some incredible predictions, like they need 900,000 people and, unfilled positions, 900,000.
Unfillable, actually, is what it's about 500,000 unfillable, meaning there aren't people that will fill them.
Okay, so the question is, this is not going to scale. The universities cannot produce these many people. So what are your thoughts about possible solutions?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and one I spend a lot of time on in that situation. And I think the solution space comes down on 3 fronts. The first one is, and it's going to sound trite, because one, I'm a girl, and I just talked to you about my grandmother, and I'm raising a girl in the computer science industry, and that is we need to encourage more diverse sets of individuals in this space, not just girls, but underrepresented minorities and other pieces. And if you look at the pipeline, there is parity in the pipeline out of the universities. And so that's an easy first fix. that we could do. It's not going to get us all the way there, but talk about low-hanging fruit. Now that is a radical inversion in a bunch of ways that's necessary. The second thing that we need to continue to do is we actually need to move people to realize that people are not a commodity, that people are in fact the expertise, and we need to make sure that we're using them in the right places in that landscape. So there's a bunch of automation that is being brought to the problem and can continue to be brought to the problem, but we still have this belief that we need to bring people in mass numbers. So really looking at the balance between the humans and the machines, I think is the second part that's incredibly important. The third part that's incredibly important is back to this simplicity argument. We need to change the problem that they're solving. And be ready for that kind of a dynamic change. Now that is not a short-term answer, and I know that, but it is an answer that we have to have and that we need to do regardless, and so the people pressure will just continue to evolve in that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate your time this morning, and I just want to encourage you to make the most out of this event. It is a really phenomenal opportunity that's been put in front of you, and so please don't squander it. Thank you.